Namaste student. Today we have to continue our class. In a previous class we discussed about the ethnic composition of Sri Lanka, in which we discussed about the complicated ethnic composition. Here we have to continue that topic in our in this session. Here we basically discuss about the policies which was adopted by Sri Lanka to introduce power sharing. Sri Lanka adopted policy of majoritarianism. Sri Lanka adopted policy of majoritarianism in their nation. According to this policy, a series of majoritarian measures were introduced. Means to say, the majority group of people, those who were found in Sri Lanka, they received the power to rule administration, to maintain government. And in a previously we discussed about this, 74% of people living in Sri Lanka were related to Sinhala speaking group. So on the basis of that 74%, Sinhala received majority in Sri Lanka, and the basis of that majority they introduced their government. Just after freedom, Sri Lanka received freedom in 1948. And just after freedom, the Sinhalese introduced themselves very strongly in Sri Lanka on the basis of majority. But here the minority section which we found in Sri Lanka are Tamils. So these Tamil people were exploited by the Sinhali group or Sinhala speaker people. But one act was passed in year 1956. This act provided a supremacy to the Sinhala speaker people. Let's see what important provisions were there in this 1956 Act, or we can say Sinhala Provision Act. The first provision, Sinhali language considered as an official language. Sinhalas promote their own language as a national or official language in Sri Lanka. So they recognize Sinhala official language in Sri Lanka. Second, they introduce national religion. They introduce national religion in their nation, and that is Buddhism. They introduce Buddhism as a national religion in their own nation. Because most of the Sinhala speaking people were practicing Buddhism. That's why they introduced Buddhism as a national religion. Third provision, entire high posted jobs, government jobs are reserved only for Sinhalas. Only for Sinhalas. So these three important provisions were introduced by Act 1956. And by introducing these provisions, a system of power sharing we can see somehow demolished, because these three important provisions cannot recommended in a democratic nation, because in a democratic nation the main spirit of democracy is equality. Here we can see the equality is totally destroyed, because they introduce one language as an official language and also deny the other languages which are present in Sri Lanka. Second, they introduce Buddhism as a national religion. So if we can found in a democratic nation, so many religions were practiced. Then on the basis of equality, we cannot introduce any religion as a national religion. But Sri Lanka introduced Buddhism. So this is also been cannot find in a democracy. Third, all the jobs, opportunities only reserved for the Sinhala speakers. That is also show the inequality pattern in Sri Lanka. By all these three important provisions in Sri Lanka, dissatisfaction and aggression was developed in other minority groups like Tamils. Tamils were having 18% population in Sri Lanka, and they were considered in a minority group. So the Sinhala speaking people or the majority group people now started exploiting the minority group. Tamils, and because of that the Tamils were dissatisfied and showing very strong protest against all these provisions. Against of these all provisions, they were introduced there are three demands in front of the Sinhala government. The three demands are: first, Tamil want their own language, Tamil, as an official language. This is the first demand introduced by Sri Lankan Tamils, or we can say Tamils with those who are living in Sri Lanka. Second demand, they also required equal rights. They also required equal rights in a field of education, health and administration. So by that they received a regional autonomy. Second, they introduced their third demand, and one of the most important demand, because the upper two demands were denied by the Sinhala government. Then strongly they introduced their third important demand related to the separate state. They demanded a separate state in Sri Lanka, and that is Tamil Eelam. By these three demands, and because of these three provisions introduced by the 1956 Act, a condition of civil war was started in Sri Lanka, and this civil war was created huge massacre in Sri Lanka. And all these type of activities we can find out only by this important policy, majoritarianism, which was adopted by Sinhalese group or a Sinhala speaking people in Sri Lanka. So this policy is being considered the very negative aspect, because by this policy people were also feel enlightened, discarded and feel very unconscious because of this all activities. Okay student, this much we have to discuss in this class. Next we have to discuss in our next class. Thank you.